Chapter 1. The End. The world had ended, and Damien barely survived the first night. He had been at home, lazily sprawled on the couch, flipping through channels when the emergency broadcast cut in. The chilling message that followed confirmed what the internet rumors had been whispering about for weeks. A deadly virus had turned people into mindless, flesh-hungry monsters. Panic surged through him, but it wasn't until he heard the first scream outside his apartment window that he knew this was real. For hours, Damien remained in shock, frozen in his seat, clutching his phone as news anchors repeated the same dire warnings: stay inside, avoid infected individuals, await rescue. But rescue never came. The distant screams grew closer, the streets below filling with chaos. His fight or flight instincts finally kicked in. He locked every door, turned off the lights, and rummaged through his apartment for anything useful. His camping gear, his hunting knife, a backpack, water bottles, canned food. By morning, the screams had dulled to occasional moans and shuffling footsteps. Damien knew he couldn't stay here forever. He needed to find more information, figure out his next move. Gathering information, Damien moved carefully through his apartment building, listening for signs of movement. He found a vacant unit with a battery-powered radio and tuned into the emergency broadcast. The infection was global. Major cities had fallen. Governments were in disarray. Evacuation centers were overwhelmed or worse, overrun. He listened for hours, hoping for a sign that help was coming. But all he heard was despair. The realization hit him like a gut punch. No one was coming. If he wanted to survive, he had to rely on himself. Chapter 2. Survival Instincts. Drawing from his camping experience, Damien crafted a plan. The world had been shattered, and the new reality he found himself in was one of raw survival. It wasn't just about staying alive, it was about staying hidden, about avoiding attention, and learning to adapt to a world that had lost all semblance of order. He needed to be smart. He needed to move like a ghost, blending into the shadows and moving only when necessary. The first step was obvious. He needed better supplies. Clothes that would offer protection from the elements and the dangers of the world now outside. Weapons that wouldn't attract attention, something silent but deadly. Food that wouldn't spoil and would keep him going as long as possible. And water. Water was a luxury he couldn't afford to take for granted. Mapping out safe routes became part of his daily routine. He avoided main roads, steered clear of high traffic areas, and focused on routes that would take him through alleys, narrow streets, and quieter parts of the city. The infection had ravaged the larger areas, but smaller, less obvious places might be less dangerous. If he could keep a low profile, he might just make it through this. With his plan in mind, Damien set out. His first goal was an outdoor supply store. The place had a reputation for carrying camping gear, clothing, and survival tools, exactly what he needed to survive in this new, dangerous world. The idea of making the journey to the store, however, wasn't without its risks. The streets were a labyrinth of uncertainty, filled with the shambling remains of what had once been normal people, now twisted by the virus. Damien moved cautiously, staying to the shadows and using his knowledge of the city's layout to avoid open areas. He hadn't seen a living soul in days, only the undead, stumbling aimlessly through streets that were once bustling with life. His heart pounded as he moved, adrenaline coursing through him, but his training kept him focused. He slipped down an alley, holding his breath as a group of zombies shuffled past. Their groans were a steady reminder of the ever-present threat. He crouched, pressing himself flat against the wall of a building, every muscle tense and ready to spring into action. The zombies didn't seem to notice him, their senses dulled by the virus, but he wasn't taking any chances. One misstep, one wrong sound, and they would be on him in seconds. When they passed, he exhaled sharply, the tension in his body easing just a little. But he knew better than to let his guard down. He still had a long way to go. The store was just a few blocks away, but it wasn't going to be easy to get there. The streets were cluttered with abandoned cars, overturned dumpsters, and debris. It was a perfect trap for any survivor foolish enough to make noise. The undead were everywhere, and one slip up could lead to an overwhelming horde. He crouched behind a dumpster, peeking out cautiously. A small group of zombies wandered aimlessly near the entrance of the store, blocking his path. There were 4 of them, shambling, groaning, their eyes glazed over. His mind raced as he considered his options. He could wait for them to leave, but that might take hours. The longer he waited, the greater the chance that more zombies might appear. His eyes darted to the crossbow he carried, the one item he had taken from his apartment before venturing out. Silent, effective, and deadly if he used it right. He drew the crossbow slowly, carefully, making sure it didn't make a sound. His hands were steady now, the tremors of his earlier panic gone, as he became more accustomed to the new world. He knocked a bolt, aimed carefully at the closest zombie, and released the trigger. The bolt flew through the air with a soft twang, and the zombie collapsed, an arrow through its skull. The other zombies turned in response to the sound, but it wasn't the bolt that attracted their attention. It was the sound of the body hitting the ground. Damien cursed under his breath. He had miscalculated. The noise had drawn the attention of the others, and now they were all heading in his direction. He was about to fire again when one of the zombies, the closest, caught sight of him. It began to shuffle toward him, its teeth bared in a grotesque, snarling grin. His heart pounded, and for a split second, panic gripped him. But he fought it down, forcing himself to remain calm. His training kicked in. Damien raised his crossbow and fired once more. The bolt struck true, sinking into the zombie's skull. It collapsed like the others, a lifeless heap of rotting flesh on the pavement. But the remaining zombies were still coming. His breath quickened as he weighed his options. There were too many of them, and he couldn't afford to be discovered. He needed to move, and quickly. He dove into the nearby store's entryway, the old wooden door creaking as he shoved it open. Inside, the space was dark and quiet. Thankfully, no zombies were in sight. He leaned against the door, trying to steady his breathing. He had barely escaped, but he couldn't linger long. The store was filled with rows of camping gear, survival supplies, and racks of clothes. He moved quickly, pulling out a bag from a shelf and filling it with essentials, food rations, a first aid kit, water purification tablets, and tools. The clothing he found was practical, durable, lightweight, and suited for movement. Sturdy boots that would protect his feet, gloves to keep his hands safe, and a weatherproof jacket. He scanned the store for more weapons. He needed something quieter, something that wouldn't draw attention. And then he saw it, a crossbow hanging in the corner of the store. It was a bit bulkier than the one he had, but it would do. He grabbed it, taking a few extra bolts for good measure. As he checked the supplies, the realization began to settle in. Every movement had to be deliberate, every step calculated. Noise was his enemy. The slightest sound could draw a horde of zombies to his position. The world outside had changed, and so had he. He couldn't afford to make mistakes anymore. He took a deep breath, and before he left the store, he checked the exits. He wasn't sure when he would be back, but he couldn't afford to leave anything behind. And so, Damien began his journey, moving carefully through the city like a shadow. Each day, he grew more adept at the art of survival. His senses heightened and his instincts sharpened. The fear, the panic, the mistakes, they all faded, replaced by something far more dangerous, caution and calculation. The zombies were slow, but their numbers made them a constant threat. But with each passing day, Damien grew more confident. He learned how to move silently, how to stay hidden, how to avoid the undead. He learned how to control his breath, how to keep his body still when danger was near. Every encounter was a lesson, and he took them all to heart. He had no choice. In this world, survival meant learning quickly or dying. And as the days passed, Damien was becoming better and better at staying alive. Chapter 3. The Plan. This city was a death trap. The streets were a maze of destruction and chaos, with buildings standing as silent monuments to a world gone wrong. Damien had spent days moving from one dangerous area to the next, scavenging for supplies and avoiding the undead. Every day had been a struggle for survival, but the realization had dawned on him. He couldn't keep hiding in the city. If he wanted to survive long term, he needed to move on, to find a place that would offer him both safety and resources. His best chance was the wilderness, a place where he could retreat from the dangers of the city and live off the land. But not just any wilderness would do. He needed an area where the land met the ocean, a place where zombies would be scarce, and he could keep his back safe. A dense forest meeting the ocean would provide natural defenses. The forest would give him cover from any approaching threats from the land, and the ocean would limit access from the rear. If anything came at him from behind, it would be hard to miss. The thought of it gave him a sense of relief. In the wilderness, he would have the chance to breathe, to relax even if just a little, and there he could create a life that wasn't defined by constant fear. But the wilderness wasn't going to come without challenges of its own. He would need to be self-sufficient, and for that, he needed to plan carefully. Damien had already begun stocking up on essential supplies. He knew the importance of water. If he couldn't find a fresh water source, he needed a way to purify whatever he came across. He'd grabbed several packs of water purification tablets from the store, and he planned to use them for any natural water sources he came across. Boiling water would work, but he needed to be able to act quickly when supplies ran low, and the tablets were lightweight, portable, and easy to carry. Food was another issue. Though he had enough canned food and dried meals to last him for a while, he knew that he couldn't depend on these supplies indefinitely. He would need to grow his own food. He picked up a small packet of vegetable seeds from the store, tomatoes, carrots, lettuce, and beans. Growing these crops wouldn't be easy, and he wasn't sure what kind of soil he'd be working with, but it was better than nothing. The ocean's proximity would also give him access to fresh fish, assuming he could get a net or a fishing rod. Having multiple sources of food would ensure he didn't run out, no matter the season. His biggest concern, however, was sustainability. To survive long-term in the wilderness, Damien would need to be self-sufficient, not just with food and water, but with shelter, fire, and safety. He needed tools for hunting, tools for building, and the knowledge of how to make his shelter secure. The idea of farming, fishing, hunting, and maintaining his own food sources brought him a sense of purpose. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was building something that could last. But before he could even begin this new chapter, Damien had one more obstacle to overcome. He needed a way to get to his destination. He needed a vehicle. The car he needed had to be reliable, practical, and capable of taking him through rough terrain. A simple sedan wouldn't cut it. He needed something with four-wheel drive, capable of handling the challenges of a world without road maintenance. It also had to be relatively low maintenance. In a world where finding spare parts was next to impossible, he couldn't afford to drive a car that would break down on him. Damien's plan was to find an old truck or SUV, something sturdy, with a large gas tank. Gas was already running out in some places, but there were still a few stations around. He'd have to top off the vehicle's tank before leaving the city. If he was lucky, he could find a truck with a bed for hauling supplies, though the focus was on practicality rather than luxury. The right car wasn't just a means of transportation, it was a lifeline. And with that lifeline, he could leave the city behind and head toward his new life on the edge of the wilderness. Chapter 4: An Unexpected Encounter. Damien had grown accustomed to the silence of the world around him. The endless streets, the abandoned buildings, and the oppressive weight of the apocalypse had formed a kind of monotony. His days were filled with careful movements and calculated risks as he scavenged through the remnants of civilization. He moved like a shadow, avoiding zombies and any other dangers that might present themselves. Every sound, every shift of the wind, every creak in the floor beneath his feet was a potential threat. It was during one of his supply runs that he first saw her. He'd been making his way through an old grocery store, checking the aisles for anything that might be useful. His eyes scanned the shelves, his mind already planning his next move, when he noticed a figure near the canned food section. She didn't hear him approach. She was too focused, her hands carefully examining a can as if it were the most precious thing in the world. The way she clutched it in her hands, like a lifeline, was a stark contrast to the cold, dead world outside. She had platinum blonde hair that cascaded down her back in waves, bright blue eyes that gleamed with determination, and a figure that, despite the chaos around her, still managed to carry itself with an effortless grace. Damien's attention shifted abruptly when he saw the zombie behind her. It was slow, dragging its feet as it neared her, its groans low and grating. Without a second thought, Damien knocked an arrow to his crossbow, aimed, and fired. The bolt struck true, piercing the zombie's skull with a sickening thud. It crumpled to the floor, lifeless. The girl spun around at the noise, her wide eyes locking onto the fallen creature. She stood frozen for a moment, gripping the can like it was her last meal, then blinked up at Damien. Her gaze shifted back and forth between him and the now dead zombie. There was a brief, awkward silence before she spoke. "Thanks," she said, her voice slightly breathless. Damien lowered his crossbow and shrugged. "You should be more aware of your surroundings." She tilted her head, giving him a look of mock offense. "Well, "Excuse me for being hungry," she shot back, her tone light and playful despite the grim situation. She paused, then brightened. "You got a plan?" Damien hesitated. He didn't work with others, especially not strangers. But there was something about her, something in her eyes, that made him pause. She wasn't afraid. Not really. Despite the end of the world, she carried herself with an unshakable confidence. And more than that, she seemed capable. She wasn't just another frightened person waiting for someone to save her. Before he could refuse, she added, "Look, I won't slow you down. I can cook, set up camp, and I've got good eyes. I can watch your back. Please." Damien's eyes flicked down to her stomach, which growled loudly, making her cheeks flush with embarrassment. He didn't want to get attached to anyone, but she was right. She wasn't useless. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine, but you need better clothes." As the days passed, Damien and Jasmine moved through the city together. At first, their partnership was practical, a necessity. They scavenged the remains of stores and homes, working side by side, quietly picking through the debris for anything that might help them survive. They moved with careful precision, each of them doing their part without a word. Jasmine was quick, light on her feet, and always with a sharp eye for anything that could be useful. But it wasn't just her quick reflexes or her attention to detail that impressed Damien, it was her sense of humor, her ability to stay lighthearted, even in the darkest of situations. One time, while they were searching for supplies in a rundown warehouse, they came across a stash of old cans of food. Jasmine had picked up a can of chili, inspecting it like a treasure. "Do you think it's still good?" she asked, wiggling her eyebrows playfully. Damien, ever the skeptic, raised an eyebrow. "I wouldn't trust it." Jasmine made a dramatic face, pretending to faint in slow motion. "I'm heartbroken," she said, but then grinned. "I guess I'll have to settle for a can of beans then." Damien smirked, shaking his head. Despite the bleakness of their situation, her playful nature kept him on edge in a way he hadn't realized he needed. They would share small moments like this, quick, brief exchanges where the weight of the world felt a little lighter. As the days turned into weeks, they learned to work together like a well-oiled machine. They encountered obstacles, locked doors, broken staircases, and, of course, zombies. At first, there were mistakes. One evening, they were caught by surprise when a zombie stumbled into the room they were hiding in. It was only through sheer luck and quick thinking that they managed to take it down without attracting more attention. But with each encounter, they grew better. They began to anticipate each other's movements, working in sync. Damien would take the lead, moving silently through the dark, and Jasmine would cover his back, her sharp eyes always on the lookout for any threats. One such instance came when they were exploring an abandoned store for medical supplies. As they turned a corner, Damien was caught off guard by a sudden noise, an entire group of zombies stumbling into the same aisle. He immediately reached for his crossbow, but one of the zombies lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She grabbed a nearby metal pipe and swung it with all her strength, striking the zombie square in the face, sending it reeling. She grabbed his arm, pulling him up, her grip surprisingly firm. "You okay?" she asked, eyes scanning for more threats. Damien nodded, shaking off the disorientation. "Thanks." "No problem," she said with a grin, though there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "I told you I could watch your back." One night, after a long day of scavenging, they found shelter in an abandoned bookstore. They sat on the cold floor, surrounded by dusty shelves and the remnants of a world that once was. Jasmine had managed to scrape together some ingredients for a meal: beans, rice, and a few seasonings she had found along the way. "Get ready for the best apocalypse meal ever," she said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Spicy beans and rice. It's got a little kick, but it's delicious. Oh." She handed him a bowl, practically bouncing with anticipation as she waited for his reaction. Damien took a cautious bite, and then another, his mouth warming from the heat of the spices. Despite the simplicity of it, the flavor hit him like a wave of comfort. "You're gonna love this," she said, already digging into her own bowl. After a few bites, she groaned in exaggerated pleasure. If food was a person, I'd marry it." But Damien chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Good to know where your priorities are." She grinned, not missing a beat. "Hey, in this world, a good meal is worth more than gold." As they continued to eat, the conversation shifted. They spoke about the world before the outbreak, about the places they had been, the things they had done. But in the midst of the banter, something else started to grow. There was a trust between them, a quiet understanding. They took care of each other without realizing it, sharing food, watching each other's backs, offering small words of encouragement when things got tough. Jasmine's playful nature lightened the mood, but it was her quiet strength that impressed Damien the most. She was resourceful, confident, and smart. And when things went wrong, when danger was close, she didn't hesitate to step up. One time, they were ambushed by a group of zombies while they were looting a gas station. Jasmine had grabbed a crowbar and, without thinking, charged straight at the closest zombie, knocking it back with a sharp swing. Damien had been impressed and more than a little relieved to have her on his side. As their time together stretched on, they found themselves depending on each other more and more. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about looking out for the other person. One morning, while they were on another supply run, they came across a narrow alleyway where two zombies were blocking their path. Damien was about to take them out when one of them lunged at Jasmine from the side, narrowly missing her. Without thinking, Damien rushed forward, tackling the zombie off her and sending it to the ground. He quickly dispatched it with a swift strike. Jasmine looked up at him, wide-eyed. "Thanks," she said softly, her voice low. Damien simply nodded, a strange warmth flooding his chest. It wasn't just gratitude. He realized then that he was beginning to care about her, more than just a fellow survivor, more than just someone he was traveling with. She had become something else, someone else. Later that night, as they sat beside a crackling fire, she reached over and grabbed his water bottle without asking, taking a long swig before handing it back. Damien raised an eyebrow but didn't comment, simply taking the bottle from her. Their comfort level was growing, unspoken trust weaving through their every action. And then there was the moment with the apple. They had stopped to rest, the sun slowly sinking behind them. Damien sliced an apple in half and, without thinking, held a slice out to her. At first, Jasmine looked at the apple in confusion, then up at him. She hesitated, but without a word, took the slice from his hand, offering him a soft smile in return. It was small, but it meant something. They were no longer just surviving together. They were growing closer in ways neither of them could fully articulate. The connection was there, steady and undeniable, building with every quiet gesture, every shared moment, every unspoken understanding. Chapter 5, The Road Trip. The journey was far from smooth, though they had managed to find an old SUV with just enough gas to get them moving. The road ahead was riddled with obstacles, abandoned vehicles, collapsed buildings, and the ever-present danger of the undead. Their plan was simple: head toward the next major city where supplies might still be plentiful. But as they quickly learned, nothing in this world was ever that easy. It started as a faint sound, low groans carried by the wind. Damien was behind the wheel, his grip steady on the steering wheel as they navigated the highway littered with the remnants of civilization. Jasmine, sitting in the passenger seat, had been flipping through an old road map when she suddenly stiffened. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Damien's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, then to the road ahead. His muscles tensed. The sound was growing louder, closer, and then they saw them. A horde. Dozens, maybe even hundreds of zombies, shambling down the cracked asphalt, their bodies twisted and grotesque from decay. Some dragged themselves with missing limbs, while others lurched forward with eerie persistence. They filled the entire stretch of road ahead, blocking their path forward. "Turn around," Jasmine said quickly. "No." Damien didn't hesitate. He yanked the wheel hard, the tires screeching as the SUV swerved. But as they turned, another group of undead emerged from the side streets, cutting off their escape. They were surrounded. "Out! We're running!" Damien barked, already reaching for his crossbow. Jasmine grabbed her crowbar and shoved open the door. The second they hit the pavement, the smell of rot filled their lungs. The closest zombies were mere yards away. Damien fired off a shot, taking down one with a bolt through the skull, while Jasmine swung her crowbar at another, cracking its jaw clean off. "Go, go, go," Damien shouted, pushing Jasmine toward a nearby alleyway. They sprinted, their boots slamming against the pavement. The undead pursued, moaning hungrily. Jasmine glanced over her shoulder. "They're gaining." Damien grabbed her wrist and yanked her forward just as a zombie lunged from a doorway. It narrowly missed, fingers grazing the fabric of her jacket before she swung her crowbar, knocking it back. They turned another corner, only to be met with a dead end. Literally. 3 more zombies stood in their path. Clem. Damien pointed to a fire escape ladder just within reach. He boosted Jasmine up first before grabbing onto the rungs himself. The zombies clawed at their legs, teeth snapping, but they were just out of reach. As they scrambled to the rooftop, they finally caught their breath. That was too close. Jasmine panted, her hands on her knees. Damien scanned the cityscape. The only way forward was to find another route. We have to detour. This whole street is swarming. She nodded. Lead the way. After weaving through side streets and alleyways, they managed to circle back to their SUV, miraculously untouched. They drove in silence, adrenaline still thrumming through their veins. That silence was shattered by a sudden thump, thump, thump. Damien cursed, pulling the vehicle to a stop. Flat tire, just perfect. They were in an open stretch of road, flanked by trees on one side and the remnants of a shopping district on the other. Too exposed. Damien grabbed his knife and crossbow. We clear the area first, then I'll fix it. But Jasmine nodded, gripping her crowbar as they methodically checked the surroundings. A few bodies lay sprawled on the pavement, but they weren't moving. Satisfied, Damien returned to the SUV, retrieving a spare tire from the back. As he crouched to remove the damaged one, Jasmine kept watch, eyes darting between the streets and the tree line. The eerie silence put her on edge. Then, a rustling. She turned just in time to see movement from beneath a nearby car. Damien. A zombie crawled out from under the vehicle, inches from Damien's exposed back. Before he could react, Jasmine swung her crowbar with full force, crushing its skull. It collapsed mere feet from where he knelt. Damien looked up, eyes wide. Shit. Jasmine let out a shaky breath. We missed one. Damien stood, running a hand over his face. I owe you one. She smirked, nudging his arm. You owe me two. They finished changing the tire quickly, then got back on the road, more alert than ever. With their Dieter, they were running dangerously low on fuel. When they spotted an old gas station ahead, Damien made the call. We stop here. Quick in and out. Jasmine gave a sharp nod. I'll cover you. The station's glass windows were cracked but intact. A few undead shambled inside. Damien motioned to the door. We clear it together, quietly. They slipped inside, moving like shadows. The first zombie turned at the sound of their footsteps. Damien let loose a bolt, taking it down instantly. Jasmine handled the next one, slamming her crowbar into its skull before it could react. They moved aisle by aisle, checking for supplies. Jasmine grabbed a couple of energy bars and a half-full water bottle. Damien found a roll of duct tape, a few lighters, and miraculously, a first aid kit. They moved toward the back, where the station's emergency fuel reserves were kept. Damien siphoned what he could into the SUV, while Jasmine stood guard. She was getting used to this, watching his back, him watching hers. It was second nature now. As soon as the tank was full, they climbed back into the SUV and sped off, leaving the desolate station behind. The long nights on the road forged something unspoken between them. Jasmine, ever resourceful, managed to turn even their dwindling supplies into meals that felt almost normal. Spacey canned soup, with a side of slightly stale crackers. She joked one night, handing him a bowl. Damien smirked, taking a bite. Honestly, not bad. When they weren't on the move, he taught her how to use his crossbow. She picked it up quickly, and after a few days, she could hit a can from 20 yards away. Looks like I won't have to save your ass as much, she teased. And then there were the quieter moments. One evening, as they studied a map, Jasmine grabbed his water bottle without asking and took a sip. Damien barely glanced up. Another time, as she sat cross-legged, looking over a route, he sliced an apple and absent-mindedly lifted a piece to her lips. She hesitated for a split second before taking it, offering a small smile in return. They didn't talk about it, but it was there. Their bond wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust, about understanding, about the quiet, unspoken knowledge that no matter what came next, but they wouldn't be facing it alone. B. Funtress and Jew, the 70th at thou septi tupo, Chapter 6, New Allies. After weeks of travel, careful planning, and countless close calls, Damien and Jasmine finally found what they were looking for, a house that could be turned into a true stronghold. Nestled at the edge of a dense forest, where it met the coastline, it was the perfect location. The ocean protected their back, allowing them to focus their defenses forward. The property itself was surrounded by a rusting metal fence, partially collapsed in places, but still offering a solid foundation to build upon. They didn't enter blindly. First, they scouted the perimeter, taking note of possible entry points and any movement inside. The house was eerily silent, but silence in this world meant nothing. Carefully, they moved in, weapons at the ready. The living room was covered in dust, a sign that no one had been here for a while. The kitchen had signs of a struggle, overturned chairs, dried blood on the counter, but no bodies. That was both good and bad. It meant whoever had been here was either long gone or turned and wandering somewhere else. Upstairs, they found 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. A quick sweep confirmed there were no zombies inside, but there were signs that someone had once holed up here. A few scattered belongings, some empty cans, and an old notebook lay on the bedside table. Damien skimmed through it but found nothing useful, just musings of whoever had lived here before the world fell apart. "The place has good bones," Jasmine said, peering out the window. "Fix the fence, reinforce the doors and windows, and we might just have ourselves a home." And Damien nodded, already making a mental checklist of what needed to be done. The first order of business was securing the area. They dragged furniture in front of the doors and set up a rudimentary alarm system using empty cans tied to string. That first night, neither of them slept much. Every little sound made them tense, fingers twitching toward their weapons. But morning came, and with it, a sense of cautious hope. The next few days were spent reinforcing their home. Damien worked on securing the fence while Jasmine cleared out the interior, ensuring there were no weak points. They scavenged materials from nearby abandoned houses, using whatever they could find to board up windows and strengthen doors. When they weren't fortifying their home, they focused on sustainability. Damien started clearing an area behind the house for a small farm, using the seeds they had collected along their journey. Jasmine, ever the resourceful one, turned their makeshift kitchen into something more functional, organizing supplies and even managing to bake some form of bread using stored flour and rainwater. Their partnership, once built on cautious necessity, had turned into something more. Their comfort with each other grew in small ways. Jasmine grabbing a drink from Damien's bottle without asking while they planned their next steps. Damien absent-mindedly handing Jasmine a sliced apple as they studied a map. The first time he did it, she hesitated, eyes flicking between him and the apple. Then, with a small smile, she took a bite. No words were exchanged, but something unspoken passed between them. Then came the night they let their guard down. Just a little. It had been a particularly good day. They had managed to find some supplies in an old hunting cabin, including preserved food, and, most importantly, a bottle of whiskey. Back at the house, Jasmine grinned as she held up the bottle. "I say we celebrate." Damien arched an eyebrow. "Celebrate what?" She shrugged. "Still being alive, actually having a place to sleep that isn't a car or some abandoned store. Take your pick." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right. 1 drink." 1 drink turned into 2, then 3. Laughter came easier. The weight of survival momentarily lifted. They talked about things that had nothing to do with zombies or survival. Music, books, the things they missed most about the world before. At some point, Jasmine leaned against him, warmth radiating between them. And then, with a kind of reckless abandon that came from knowing tomorrow wasn't guaranteed, they gave in to something that had been building between them for weeks. Morning came with the reality of what had happened. But instead of awkwardness, there was a quiet understanding. They didn't talk about it, didn't define it. They just continued, stronger, closer, more attuned to each other than before. Their routine continued, fixing up the house, going on supply runs, defending their territory. It was on one such run that they found the 3 survivors. They had been trapped inside a small hardware store, barricaded but running out of options. Jasmine was the first to see them. "We should help." Damien hesitated. More people meant more mouths to feed, more people to protect. But it also meant more hands to help build a future. They moved quickly, taking out the small group of zombies surrounding the store before prying open the barricade. The 3 inside looked wary but relieved. Lucas was the first to step forward, a lean, dark-haired man in his late 20s with a quiet but steady presence. "Thanks for the assist." He introduced himself as a former paramedic, the strategist of their small group. Eva, a fiery redhead with piercing green eyes, was more guarded. She carried twin daggers and had an easy agility about her that made Damien think of a predator waiting to strike. She had been part of a parkour group before the world fell apart, which explained her ability to move so swiftly. Samira, the last of the trio, was a tall woman with deep brown eyes and her hair in tight braids. She had been a mechanical engineer before the outbreak, and her skills had helped them survive in more ways than one. And Damien wasn't about to let them in without caution. "We need to check for bites." Lucas gave a short nod and lifted his shirt and sleeves while Damien inspected him. Jasmine handled the women, checking their arms and legs for any telltale signs. When they came up clean, Damien laid out the rules. No unnecessary risks. No wandering off alone. If someone sees something, we tell each other. And if you ever get bitten, you don't hide it. No one argued. They knew the stakes. Bringing the new group back to their base was an adjustment for everyone. The house, once quiet with just Damien and Jasmine, now had more voices, more movement, and more opinions. For the first few days, things were awkward. Lucas, naturally reserved, spent most of his time assessing their medical supplies and creating an organized station for injuries. Eva, who was used to moving alone, had trouble adjusting to teamwork, often disappearing onto the roof to keep watch or taking solo scouting trips until Damien put a stop to it. Samira, despite being one of the more easygoing of the three, took her time before fully opening up. She spent most of her hours working outside, strengthening their fencing and planning ways to make the base more secure. Jasmine, ever the social one, made the transition easier. She dragged Eva into their late-night conversations, included Lucas in meal preparations, and asked Samira about every project she was working on. Slowly, the tension melted and friendships formed. By the end of the first week, it no longer felt like two groups merging, but one. Together, they fortified their home with strategic defenses, ensuring they were protected from both zombies and potential raiders. Damien led the effort in digging trenches around the perimeter, making it harder for zombies to simply wander in. Samira used her engineering skills to reinforce the fencing, setting up layers of barriers to slow down any approaching threats. They scavenged for materials using wooden planks, scrap metal, and even salvaged parts from abandoned vehicles to fortify their walls. To sustain themselves, they expanded the farm behind the house. Damien tilled the soil, and Jasmine planted seeds they had gathered from various supply runs. Lucas, with his knowledge of survival medicine, ensured they grew plants that could serve as medicinal herbs in case of injuries or infections. Eva, being agile and resourceful, set up makeshift trellises to grow climbing plants like beans and tomatoes, maximizing their food production. Water collection became a priority. They rigged up a rainwater collection system using tarps, pipes, and large barrels they had salvaged from a nearby warehouse. They purified the water with charcoal filters and purification tablets, ensuring a steady supply of clean drinking water. It took trial and error, but eventually, they perfected the system, reducing their need to scavenge for bottled water. The idea for a chicken coop came when Jasmine found a few stray chickens near an abandoned farm. She and Eva managed to catch them after a chaotic chase, laughing breathlessly as they carried the squawking birds back home. Fresh eggs would be invaluable, providing a consistent source of protein. They built a sturdy coop near the farm, reinforcing it against predators and zombies alike. Over time, they even found more chickens, adding to their growing supply of eggs. The goats were a complete accident. One day, while searching for supplies, Samira and Damien stumbled upon a small barn just beyond the forest line. Inside, they found a pair of goats, half starved but still alive. They spent hours coaxing them out with whatever food they could find, eventually leading them back home. The goats provided milk, which they could drink or turn into cheese. It was a major win for their sustainability, and the goats quickly became a beloved part of their home. One afternoon, just as they were settling into a routine, a lone zombie wandered close to the house. It caught them off guard. Jasmine was the first to spot it from the kitchen window, nearly dropping a pot as she gasped. Lucas and Samira froze, their eyes darting to Damien for direction. Eva was already reaching for her daggers, but the panic in the air was palpable. The zombie groaned, shuffling towards the side of the house where their fence was weakest. "We need to kill it before it attracts more," Damien said, keeping his voice calm. Eva was the first to move, vaulting over part of the fence and dispatching the zombie in a quick, fluid motion. The whole group remained tense even after it was dead, their breaths heavy with adrenaline. "We need a better system for this," Samira finally muttered, breaking the silence. From that day on, they planned better. They created lookout shifts, designated weapons for each member, and practiced quick eliminations. The next few zombies that wandered close were met with swift, decisive action. No more hesitation, no more panic, just survival. Despite the horror of the world, they found moments of peace, sharing drinks, laughter, and quiet nights under the stars. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. Chapter 7, The Beginning After the End. The world was still broken. The undead still roamed, a constant reminder that survival was never guaranteed. But in their small, self-made sanctuary, Damien and Jasmine had found something worth fighting for: each other. Life within their walls had become structured, almost routine. Each morning, they took turns patrolling the perimeter, ensuring their defenses remained intact. Lucas tended to their medical supplies, always ready in case of injury. Eva reinforced their escape routes, making sure they had multiple options should disaster strike. Samira worked on improvements, from reinforcing the fencing to crafting new tools to make their daily work easier. Despite the dangers, there was laughter. Jasmine teased Damien endlessly about his serious nature, and he responded with exasperated sighs that only made her laugh harder. Lucas and Eva bickered like siblings, while Samira always had a calm, guiding presence that kept them all grounded. One evening, after a long day of scavenging, Damien and Jasmine sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the ocean. The sky burned with hues of red and orange, a beauty untouched by the horrors of the world. Jasmine leaned against him, silent for once. He didn't move away. "You know," she said eventually, "someone told me before the outbreak that I'd end up here, with you. I would have laughed in their face, Da. I would have laughed too," Damien admitted. She smirked, nudging him. "Rude," he exhaled, shaking his head. "Not rude, just honest." He glanced at her then, his expression softer than usual. "I never thought I'd have this." Jasmine went quiet, the teasing glint in her eyes giving way to something deeper. Neither. They stayed like that for a while, watching the world shift from day to night. Somewhere in the distance, the moan of the undead echoed through the trees, but it was far away, unable to reach them here. Damien squeezed her hand. "We keep going." Jasmine smiled, lacing her fingers with his. Together, but the world was still broken. The undead still roamed. But in this moment, in their small haven carved out of the ruins, they had something no apocalypse could take from them: hope. If you enjoyed the story, why not drop a like and maybe consider subscribing? I plan to upload new and unique stories several times a week.